The main question today is on pepper in 18th century America. Thanks for joining us today on Questions and Answers with James Townsend and Son. Here's a great question that came in on the last video. This is from High Five Ghost. Hey there, John. So as I've been watching your videos and a thought has crossed my mind several times, I'm aware that many of these puddings are still created today, i.e. bread pudding. But I was wondering when what Americans consider to be pudding now became popular. As an example, here is a pudding cup found in your average grocery store. Was this type of pudding around in the 16th century? Did it come later? Well, I actually cover this right away in the very first boiled pudding episode I did. I don't know, it was probably 4 or 5 years ago by now. I'll make sure to put a link down in the description section. And in fact, I start out that video holding one of these plastic pudding cups that are so common in America today. It was what we call pudding, which it doesn't actually bear any resemblance to most of the puddings that you would find in the 18th century. And really what we call pudding today, those kinds of puddings, are custards. And custards were made in the 18th century, but they didn't certainly call them puddings. The puddings we have today are really an outgrowth of industrial food that was first created in the, say, mid to late 19th century and became so popular in the 20th century and today. It's factory food. And so while they had custards in the 18th century, they certainly didn't use them like we think of them today. Here's a question that came in from one of the Q&As from last week. This is Emily Gelassi, I think is the last name. I love the old recipes, especially the baking recipes. Question: I know I can usually or easily make substitutions to make it gluten-free, but how about dairy-free? Did they use almond milk or coconut milk back then? Was dairy intolerance a problem back then or more of a modern problem? Actually, I think it is much more of a modern problem. I have yet to see any references to dairy intolerance specifically written about in the 18th century texts that I have in mind. And I have yet to see any references to milk substitutes like the coconut milk or the almond milk. I have not seen anything like that. So I guess the quick answer to that is no, you don't typically see milk substitutes. Here is Alex Rosales. This is a comment from the Switchel episode. Can I use regular vinegar instead of apple cider vinegar? You can certainly use that. I think you're going to lose a lot of the nutrition and certainly some of the taste that's going to come in with the apple cider vinegar. So while you can use something like distilled vinegar, and that will help offset the sweetness and make it better, I don't think you're going to get the same kind of taste. Here's a really good question that came in on the fried chicken episode, the one that is so popular. This is David Lidlow. And let me just kind of cut into the question here. Frying, to me, just means cooking something in a pan with a thin layer of oil, as in the way you cook a burger, meat patty, or eggs or bacon. If this is the type of frying the recipe is referring to, then this isn't that different from schnitzel. The word deep fry didn't emerge until the early 20th century, referring to deep frying as the frying in the modern American vernacular. Yeah, that's a good point. In frying, actually in the 18th century, at least in these English texts, can be very, well, the recipes are very nondescript. They'll say to fry something, and they're not really explicit about what they mean by that frying. And they did not. You never see the term deep fat fry. But there are clear indications that many of these items were deep fat fried. So you really have to kind of look into the recipe and come up with your own idea about whether they meant it one way or another. And this particular recipe, yeah, well, it's quite likely he could have meant pan frying instead of deep fat frying for that. And so it's a good point. Thank you very, very, very much for bringing that up, challenging us on that fact. And really, it is kind of up to the cook on this one. Here's one that came in on the old Pan Perdue episode, the French toast. This is Rattler X5150. He says, Mr. Townsend, did they eat steaks in the 18th century? Sirloin, T-bone, porterhouse. Were they prepared in the same way as today? That's a good question. It's kind of interesting. Some of the English recipe books don't touch on steaks very much. Other ones you'll see, especially if they have a little bit more continental influence, like French cooking, you're going to see steaks referred to, at least cooking steaks, like the way we do it today, as a carbonado, or some other kinds of, cooking on a grill situation. So definitely they ate steaks. Now, you don't see a whole lot of reference to the individual meat cuts that they would do. So, when it comes to a sirloin or a T-bone, you don't really see that much. But they definitely cooked steaks and had steaks the same way. Possibly they weren't as popular because their meat wasn't aged the same way our beef is, and so it quite likely would be tougher, so not quite as popular in the time period. Here's an interesting question or comment that came in on the Fresh Sauerkraut episode. This is Sarah Tanksalvala. I think that's how you say it. Whew, a tricky last name there. I had no idea mandolins were used that long. Just amazing. This is a great way to make sauerkraut. And let me read you a little piece. This is out of Peter Kalm's Travels of North America. It's about 1750. And he actually goes into great length explaining a mandolin or a kraut cutter. And he even says here, a tray made with boards with a flat, even bottom, about 3 feet long and 7 inches wide, with 2-inch sides. And then he goes on to describe the hole in the bottom of the tray. Across this were placed 3 knives parallel to one another. The width of each knife was about 1.5 inches, and their edges were set aslant like the blades of a plane. And he goes on, and he describes one of these mandolins or kraut cutters. So yeah, they're a very great explanation here from right about 1750. Here is a great question that came in on the asparagus and the bread. And this is, again, one of those first couple of seasons. This is a really good one. So if you haven't seen this episode, you should try to go back and find it, where we do the asparagus forced in a French roll. It's really good. Anyway, here's the question. You've talked about the use of salt before, but what about black pepper? How common was that in the 18th century? Was it a bit of a luxury? Well, pepper is very, very, very common. It is like the most common spice you're going to see in the English cookbooks of the time period. They even called it the master spice, and they used it in just about everything. And in Patricia Mitchell's little book on spices, I didn't look up her primary references, but she says that pepper was so popular in the 18th century that they built fleets of ships just to carry pepper to North America. It was that popular, even here. They used black pepper, they used white pepper, they even used long pepper, which is not quite the same. It's the same genus, but a different species. You can sometimes even find that today. But it was specifically mentioned as another kind of a pepper flavor. And if you want more information specifically on spices in the 18th century in these cookbooks, we've got a great post just on spices in our savoringthepast.net cooking blog. I'll make sure to put a link down in the description section to that. So I want to thank everyone out there for your wonderful questions and comments. And I've got a quick question for you. If you've got a specific idea or suggestion of a topic that you're interested in for a cooking episode, if you've got a question about a particular kind of food, whether it's period or not, and how they would have made it, go ahead and put that in the comment section of this video. I'm going to be paying a special attention to this one, looking for content to make in the future. So this is a great time to give us those suggestions. I want to thank everyone out there for coming along with us as we discover and try to get through all these really interesting questions. Thank you so much for watching. If you're a new viewer and you haven't subscribed, press the subscribe button up here. That'll take you to a spot where you can subscribe. I want to thank everyone for watching.